People seem to like watching my K-Tech shock videos, and I realized I never did talk about setting it up. So how would you set up the K-Tech shock on a CRF300L? What did I do? Well, there's only two adjustments you can do. One is the preload, and the other is the rebound dampening. One thing you want to know about the preload for sure is when you mount the shock, when you install the shock, make sure that you can get to the set screw once you install the shock on the bike. I made the mistake of not doing that, and now I can't get to the set screw to adjust the preload unless I remove the shock from the bike. Now, it came with a tool, a neat tool for turning it, so you don't booger it all up. But you can't use the tool when it's on the bike. I don't see how you could possibly get it in there to turn it. Thing is, though, that I put the shock on the bike, and I didn't do any adjustment to the preload, and it feels great just the way it is. So I'm just leaving it like that. Now you can adjust the preload and measure it. Of course, it would be pretty difficult since you can't adjust it on the bike very easily. Now, if you put the set screw where you could get to it, I suppose you could loosen that and then use some other kind of tool, like a center punch and a hammer or something to turn the preload adjustment. The stock shock had two nuts, and you could easily just loosen one nut with a center punch and a hammer and then pound on the other one and adjust the preload. But on the K-Tech, it has a set screw, so you'd have to loosen that first before you turned it. You see, there's videos on YouTube about how to adjust the sag, the preload sag. They call it adjusting the sag. When you adjust the preload of the bike, you'll measure it with the bike on a stand with the wheel fully extended, and then get the rider to sit on the bike, and then you measure how much it sagged down and so on. And you want a certain percentage and all this. There's videos getting into great detail about all this. Now, I think it's more important to know why you're adjusting that, because the spring rate determines how firm the shock is, obviously. Like, I got a stiffer spring than it came on it. Now, adjusting the preload doesn't make a stiffer spring. A coil spring is just like a leaf spring, but it's just in a coil form. You can actually make a coil spring stiffer by cutting a coil off of it and making it a shorter spring, makes it stiffer. But anyway, back to the setting the sag, they call it. You measure it with the wheel all the way extended, then the rider on it. But like I say, that's more important to know why you're doing that. And what you're doing is when the rider's sitting on the bike, riding it, it's sagged down a little bit. That affects your fork angle. Now, you don't want it to be riding like a chopper, squatted down in the back, and you don't want it to be sitting too high in the back and then having it oversteer, the stink bug effect. I've never really seen that, happen on a bike like this, on a heavy bike like this, but the tendency on these is for the back to squat, and it's like a chopper, and then it handles poorly. Now, you might not even notice this because it's not that big of a deal, but I can feel when I first got this bike, when I go around a corner, I had to fight the handlebars just a little bit. Not much, but I felt myself, I had to put a little bit of pressure on them in a corner. And that's not how a motorcycle is supposed to work. Now, there is a thing called counter steering a motorcycle, and I'm sure there's a lot of videos on that. And that's good to know. Like if you're going fast down the road and you need to suddenly make a evasive maneuver, you want to turn the handlebars like in the opposite direction you want to go, and the bike will go quick. But when you're just gently going around corners back and forth, weaving down the road, you shouldn't have to feel yourself really doing anything. It should feel like you're not doing anything to the handlebars. A motorcycle, when it's set up properly, you get that preload, that sag set just right, you can go around a corner and all you have to do is kind of lean over a little bit. The handlebars just turn automatically, and then they stop turning, depending on how far you're leaned over. And it's solid as a rock. And another thing is, if you're putting pressure on the handlebars at all, going around a corner to make the corner, if you hit a slick spot, it's going to amplify that pressure you had on the bars, and it's going to turn even more, because now there's going to be no resistance anymore all of a sudden. And when you have it set up right, You're not putting any pressure on the bars. You could hit a slick spot, and that front wheel's going to track exactly where it was, and you might just still make the corner. A lot better to have it set up correctly. I can't stand the feeling of fighting against it. But you get that sag right, and it's a dream. Like I said, I didn't have to adjust it on mine. It felt fine. And with the stock shock, I even made a video about it. I made the bike handle really good by cranking down the preload to make the ride height in the back sit up a little higher, so it didn't sag down quite so far. But you get the K-Tech spring and you get the one for your weight, it's probably going to be really close to being right out of the box. But you could check it. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not against that. But my ultimate goal is to make the bike handle like a dream. And that's what I've accomplished. Because that's for the preload, the long explanation of my preload adjustment. Now, the rebound, there's a little knob you can turn with your hands on the K-Tech on the bottom of the shock, and it has 32 settings. Now, the way you adjust these is you turn it in all the way, gently, till it stops. Now, that's the firmest setting, and you have 32 positions on the K-Tech. And every time you back it out a notch, it gets softer and softer, the dampening. What I did when I got my shock, I just put it on the bike and rode it, and it felt good. It felt stiffer, but it still was bouncy. And then I went and I cranked the preload in to see where it was, and it was almost all the way out. No wonder it was so soft. I was glad to see that. So I cranked it all the way in, and I cranked it back out 16 clicks, so it was right in the middle. And I rode it, and it was like, oh, it's a dream, you know? Nice and firm. No more bouncing. There was a place on the highway I used to go. I could get in 5th or 6th gear, and this dip in the road. And I'd fly through it 50, 60 miles an hour in the back and go, ooh, up and down. It felt kind of neat, you know? But that's not good. You don't want it to do that. Especially in a corner, it's going to be unnerving. So it doesn't do that anymore. You go through a dip like that, it just goes through the dip. The bike just rides through it. You don't feel the bike moving up and down. Not anymore. But that's how you adjust the K-Tech shock on a Honda CRF300L. I just wanted to make a quick video on it because I know people seem to be interested in this shock and interested in the CRF300L. Thanks for watching and have a great day.